Cool. Welcome back to the Fleet Navigator podcast for the third and final episode of our series, Getting EV Right. Today we're talking about something that sounds simple on the surface, but in reality it's anything but, and it's choosing the right EV for a commercial fleet. Because if you just look at the brochure, a lot of these vehicles can look pretty similar. Similar range, similar charging, similar battery sizes. But once you start digging into the real-world efficiencies, charging curves, payload, towing, and actual operational fit, the differences can be huge. We've got two brilliant guests for this one. First, Charlotte Patch, head of fleet at Socotec. And Charlotte's someone I've got a huge amount of respect for. She's known for her meticulous approach to fleet strategy and policy. And she's been working closely with us at Ayvens, really digging into where electrification fits. And our own consultancy team have been blown away by some of the work that she's produced within her own team. Then we've got Matt Dillon, head of LCV at Ayvens. Matt's got experience on both sides. He's been in leasing, but he's also been a fleet manager himself, so he really knows what it's like on the ground. I'm really looking forward to this chat, and it's going to be a practical, honest discussion on why EV selection is more nuanced than people think, and how to avoid some of the common pitfalls. So let's dive right in. Charlotte, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you want to just give us a little bit of an overview as to what your day-to-day looks like from a Socotec point of view and from an Ayvens point of view? Charlotte, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So we've got a pretty large fleet, about 1,000 vehicles, about 2/3 of which are commercial assets, predominantly up to 3.5 tonne. Really, from a day-to-day standpoint, our objective is to keep our customers, our end users, those drivers on the road fee earning as much as possible. Obviously, that involves supply management, all of that transactional kind of day-to-day. But then from my perspective, strategic leadership. So understanding what direction the group's taking, what we need to achieve, where we're seeing organic growth across our business, where we're looking at potential acquisitional growth, and really kind of weaving that together to make sure that we've got a fleet strategy that delivers what the frontline teams need.
Brilliant. So definitely operational. So again,
absolutely. But, we've got to have that strategic overview. We've got to look at what the next kind of 4, 5, 10 years look like.
Yeah, without doubt. It's a moving
very
feast,
much a moving target.
Yeah.
And, weaving EV into that, making sure we're hitting our net zero targets and making sure we're kind of aligning with our strategic group goals, which are global goals, is key.
It's a big old company, isn't it?
It is. Globally, very large.
Yeah. So again, just a bit of extra context, we work with Socotec across other countries as well. But yeah, it's a really interesting business that you're working in, and yeah, definitely when we've had conversations, there's been numerous challenges where we go, oh, you do it like that, do you? Right, okay, that's going on there.
Really diverse activity.
Yeah, really diverse activity. Brilliant. Great. So Matt, do you want to give us an overview? Obviously, I know, but I'll listen to Matt now.
So yeah, as head of commercials within the UK for Ayvens, I've been there for about 5 years. Ultimately, my responsibility is around making sure our proposition is as it should be. Make sure it's hitting all the right marks for our customers. We've got the right products and services, not only sort of now, but obviously looking forward into the future, making sure that we're keeping an eye on that as well. But I guess from a experience perspective, I've probably been in the industry for about 20 years nearly now.
Long time.
Yeah, quite a long time. No, I don't look it. But,
of course.
But yeah, so I've had a variety of roles. You mentioned sort of kind of worked within fleet management, so did that for quite a few years, working in quite a complex fleet. Had cars, HGVs up to plant as well. So got good understanding certainly from a fleet management perspective. And then also been obviously quite a lot of time with the leasing and fleet management side of things as well. So hopefully I've got the right balance between understanding kind of what it feels like to be from a customer's perspective, but also from a supplier's perspective. So able to maybe understand some of those challenges, some of those pain points, but also some of those opportunities as well. So,
oh, very good. Fantastic. So we will kick straight in to the first question. So the first topic is all around why vehicle selection is now more complex than ever. Obviously, from my experience as well, when I first joined the business, we used to talk a lot around conversions, and that was a more complex part of commercial vehicles. It's not that way at all anymore, really. So I suppose my first, and it will come to you, Matt, is why is choosing the right EV become so much more complicated in comparison to ICE?
Yeah, I think if you go back sort of 10 odd years or so, life was a bit more straightforward, arguably more straightforward. I think as in diesel was a little bit more, ICE was almost the standard. It was very dominant in that space. It's still reasonably dominant today, but ultimately people have got into kind of a bit of a mode that says, I know what my life cycles are. I know the types of vehicles I use. I may have done that 3 times through cycles. I've been doing it for years. And really what you were looking for probably was any changes in engine efficiency, so whether that be Euro 5 to Euro 6, etc., or you knew your life cycle as well. You knew that you kept vehicles for 48 months, 60 months, maybe up to 100,000 miles, and you knew that was your change point. And realistically, what you were looking for when you were choosing a next vehicle is either do I go with the same one I had already, which is a safe option, or do I just have a look at what other tech might be out there, slightly better efficient engines, etc. But I think obviously from now, we move forward 10 years' time, we're now looking at another dynamic, a big change, which is electric, and it has been obviously evolving over a number of years now. That brings additional complexity. Yes, you'd be looking at efficiency. Yes, you'd be looking at reliability previously, but now you're looking at charging speeds and charging curves, and what climate I might be operating in, what routes I'm taking. Am I going to have any kind of restrictions?
Payloads.
Exactly, payload restrictions, things like that. So it's massively changed. But I think when I look at it, also this dynamic around understanding that electric vehicles will probably last longer, and you can operate them for longer periods of time, and that sounds great in terms of from a sustainability perspective, but we've got used to this sort of very rigid way of thinking I'll change my vehicle every 4 or 5 years, but actually these could be going for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and that's a different perspective to look at, certainly within fleets that are running diverse operations, and it doesn't mean to say that vehicle will be doing the same job throughout that entire life cycle. You'll probably see that some of the players that have gone into the market with, they do this one thing, that's what they do, and they'll be doing that for the next 10 years. So it's quite, not easy, but it's more straightforward to choose a vehicle. If you realise that you've only got contracts that run 2 years and they blend over each other, you work in different sectors, then utilisation, as we know as fleet managers, is key. You may need to use that vehicle in a different environment. So what you select now, it's kind of almost got to be fit for a lot longer as well, and that's really brings some weird dynamics to, what vehicle you choose. Is it capable of doing more than one job? Because that's really what the holy grail is, really, is it there? So yeah, really, really challenging at the moment. And as I said, don't maybe envy fleet managers to some extent on this one.
I mean, I've got on that, which you, Charlotte, I know we've done telematics analysis with you.
Yes.
And again, it's almost, coming to Matt's point, it's a little bit challenging, isn't it? Because if you start looking at the telematics and you say, right, great, this vehicle is going to work, and actually we've got this small pocket within the fleet that's going to be able to transition to electric, are you then potentially locked into only that part of your business that can transition to electric because
can use that specific vehicle potentially that you've identified for that use? I think, absolutely, Matt's right. I think the other element, just to add on to that, is that through all of those change cycles that we've experienced, it's never been a technology that's been completely brand new to the person behind the wheel and the person putting the person behind the wheel to work.
Yeah,
and
true.
that is another layer that sits on top of that issue. Yeah. And you talk about diverse kind of, business operations, even within, our kind of 1,000 vehicle, 600-700 vehicle commercial fleet. I'm looking at 4 operational divisions that do not do the same work. Yeah. So, you're taking that down to kind of almost a micro level, as you say, Russ, to look at what is that individual vehicle doing? How long is it going to be doing that for? What is it carrying? And then ultimately, if you find a solution for that specific activity, but business change means that you've got either exponential growth or conversely a reduction in that works activity, where do you then put that vehicle? And the last thing we can afford to do right now is then have a product that doesn't do the job for the next user that we have to sit, mothball, or do something else with. And even considering something like an internal conversion, what's been converted for one user may then not work, be it battery placement, configuration, dimensions between the wheel arches, all of these things have to then be factored in, and I don't think we had that challenge.
Yeah, I think one of the key things I can remember from moving a certain vehicle to another operation or part of the operation is it used to be just kind of, can we do a retrofit on the conversion? Was it, I'm not worried about, will it actually be able to fuel somewhere? That's never even came into question. It was more a case of, does it fit for purpose? Could I make a minor change that made sense so I didn't have to buy another vehicle or potentially get a daily rental in or a flexible vehicle? So adding to the fleet, where you don't really want to add it to the fleet, you want to use the vehicle that's not being used now, or the contract's closed, like you said, move it somewhere else. But there's a whole other dynamic as where it's operating, what region it's in. It's so much more challenging and definitely from a business case perspective.
And I think, that's a really valid point. You know, you talk about longevity and the fact that actually, operationally, practically speaking, we are probably looking at vehicles that could do, 8 to 10 years, double what we may have traditionally seen from a pure operational standpoint. And yet a lot of dialogue happening, certainly internally on our end, is can we make a TCO work that's 2 to 3 years? Because what will the next generation of that product be? We're into Gen 2, kind of borderline Gen 3 on some of these, and it's huge change. Yeah. So actually, I can't really necessarily commit to something that could do 8 years because the reality is in 2 years, somebody's going to bring a product that could materially change a factor of its capability that ultimately, completely changes the product.
We talked about it earlier on, didn't we? If you suddenly get, so we mentioned it a couple of times, I think we mentioned in the last podcast about BYD, this Blade 2, and that's 620-mile range, charges in 5-10 minutes. Unbelievable. Absolute game changer. In the same, basically, size and weight as the current Blade, a battery, not an engine, definitely a battery. And if you start replacing, if you took that same battery and put that into commercial vehicles, suddenly it gets over a lot of what we were just saying. If you had a 500-mile range in a van, you wouldn't necessarily have to think operationally in the same way. So we are potentially with that first generation locking ourselves in a little bit, and there's a fear that you're locking yourself in a lot more.
It's a really weird dynamic, though, isn't it? Yeah. It's like the technology is allowed to say that this vehicle can be operated for much longer. That's fantastic from sustainability and green agenda. But actually, the technology is moving so fast that that's not actually helping that dynamic. You almost think, like you said, I actually need to take it for a shorter period because I don't want to miss out on potential changes and advantages. I want to be behind the curve. Yeah. And often, TCO modelling and break-even points are actually a bit further down the line when you've actually done more mileage, but kind of plays against each other a little bit. And as you said, maybe, whether it's a flexible approach may help, or at least sort of dipping your toe in first rather than going all in is kind of a way to go. So,
no, I completely agree. I think that the concern is that when you look, it's very easy to stare down the barrel at what's coming in the market, and there are some fantastic developments. And when you look at cars, naturally you tend to see a couple of years later that tends to apply. So if you look at the car market right now, and then you think, well, we'll apply that to vans, there is naturally that kind of concern where you go, I'll just kick it down the road a little bit. Yeah. But then you also have then things like the ZEV mandate that can come in there, and that's putting you under more pressure from discounts and OEMs wanting to encourage you, I won't say force you, or encourage you to take a certain allocation of EVs as well. So it's a bit of a funny mix at the moment, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
So in terms of where, Charlotte, I'll come to you. When you've been looking at this, where do you think you don't have to be too critical on yourself, but where do you think you maybe underestimated EV and some of the challenges that you would have? What was there anything specifically that kind of blindsided you that you weren't expecting, or?
I think it's fair to say we're really at the start of our journey. We've made the transition in cars. We've got a kind of really clear path there, and a strategy to meet kind of our own UK and global targets as a business. When it comes to our commercial fleet, what's really, I guess, been that challenge is assessing the market, evaluating the market, and then trying to overlay those varying products with what is our use cases. And, yes, we've been able to look at telematics data, and we've been able to kind of, at this stage, drill down to, in theory, that vehicle is doing a range that meets the needs of the business. But then moving into trial stage and then starting to look at a few of those vehicles, we get challenges back from those operational areas saying things like, well, I need to carry 3 to 6 drums that are this diameter, and I can't configure them into the rear of the vehicle because of X, Y, and Z. Or actually, although I'm only carrying samples to and from a particular location, that's creating too much downtime consideration for charging. And some of these maybe are nuances. We need to do more driver education. But because you're only, I guess, sampling a vehicle for quite a short period of time, and there's so many options to sample, which all have very different capabilities, you kind of go, well, I can't test the entire market. No. So at what point do you just jump in and go, that's good enough? And that's a really tricky decision to make, to find the right point to just go, you know what, let's take the plunge and let's take, 20, 30 of these and just have a go, make it work, just
especially
try and
when
do it.
there is a cost to that.
There is a cost to that.
We're all in business, right? And,
yes.
And the business will start asking
that
those
can
questions
be a hard
and saying,
sell.
okay, that's fine. You want to make a commitment, that's fine. So it's on you.
Yeah.
Right?
And how will that deliver value, and how will that reduce cost? Because that's the other really complex dynamic here is there's a lot of talk around efficiencies and savings and cost offsets, and you go, but only really when you're at that kind of, you've got the right mix, the perfect balance, and the good, use cases, and you've got good mileage coverage, and it's so much more nuanced. I think our struggle has been getting going, overlaying infrastructure solutions with product. We're on the cusp of that now, and we will do that this year. But it's been complicated. Yeah,
without a doubt. And I think I'll kind of drill in a little bit on the real world efficiencies as well, because it can be really difficult, can't it, when you see WLTP figures that come through.
Absolutely.
But never before, because of refueling times, which is especially for LCVs, let's be honest, it is more of a factor. There is more of that operational downtime cost that's associated with refueling. Never before have we necessarily said, I mean, some diesels might not have that much range, but they go, it's all right, I can fill it up and I'm off. Whereas now it's a factor. So suddenly, if we start chipping away at what is already a relatively tight range, that can have a bigger operational impact, can't it? So, I mean, Matt, what would you say the main differences are between WLTP and lived real world?
Yeah, there is quite some interesting stats out there, and I think it's great to hear doing sort of pilots and trials. It's absolutely worthwhile doing, and I think I don't think we can only advise try before you buy scenario. Well, I would say you made a good point around shorter trials don't work. Having it for a week or so is not really going to work, and I think certainly when you look at the climate impacts and in terms of temperatures impacts on battery and range and all those sort of things, those that haven't necessarily experienced that yet, I would say if you're going to do a pilot or do a trial with drivers, make sure it's in that sort of autumn, winter, spring period. If you can get it, I know that's a long time, but the opportunity to get as many operations to try it out and have good, making sure that during that time you're also taking data as well, because you don't want it to be a hearsay situation to say, well, it didn't work that and I got 50% of range, and you kind of want to make sure you've got that information. But I think, clearly technology is moving on at a pace, okay, and we will see better ranges and better capabilities. But I think at the moment, some organisations are looking for that perfect point. When it's absolutely perfect, then we'll go. And I think, unfortunately, that's never probably going to come. And the rate at which, look at ZEV mandate, the way it's going, you kind of have to dip in and go at some point. And you're going to learn. There's probably going to be a few scars on your back as well as a result of it. But that's all good things, But going back to sort of range and technology and whether or not real world ranges versus WLTP, I think, you're seeing not quite what it's actually advertised, and yes, temperature can have payloads can have an issue, whether you might tow or not, things like that. But I thought was quite interesting actually is most recently was actually probably the Kia PV5 that achieved its Guinness World Record latter part of last year. It's not advertised anything like this, but it's done some real world tests. Approved by Guinness World Records, etc., and it's done that over 400 miles out of that vehicle, and that's some kind of witchcraft that they've achieved there.
Love to know how
I don't know how they did, but genuinely one charge through, I think it was over a 30-mile circuit, same circuit, but outside, not in any kind of protected area. And I thought that's impressive. So that's almost the complete opposite of what you're hearing capability-wise. So are our manufacturers holding back a little bit? I don't know. Are we actually driving these correctly as well?
Yeah,
that's a huge part.
That's a huge part, right?
Yeah,
massive.
And I think what we see is, you have to think about that load, those use cases. I've got extremes, right? I've got a steady fixed load. We're carrying equipment, sampling, tools. And that is the load. And take it, do their job, and come back. We've got other activity where we start empty and we gather a load, and then we have to return to a base. In some instances that's concrete blocks. So that dynamic impact on the real world capability will be huge.
And it's always the worst case scenario, isn't it? It's like, I'm getting a bit low on range. Just let's fill it up completely, make it really heavy, and then suddenly like, right, okay.
Yeah.
So all the metrics that the car or the vehicle is actually saying, it's all right, I think I've got this much range. And it's like, well, I wasn't expecting you to do that.
Yeah,
right?
look
And
at what
add
you just
all that
put in
weight.
the back. And then, that's driving more stops, which is time, which is potentially money. Public charging, has got that kind of exponential cost overlay. So, yeah, it's so much to think about. And you're right, you kind of have just got to start. I think that's where we maybe have been as a business in the last maybe 18 months, is sort of you're almost overwhelmed by choice. But also it's very hard to then narrow those choices down to, okay, in this instance, this is the right product. But yeah, you've got to go for it.
Yeah, and you don't. It's natural, isn't it? You don't want to make mistakes, do you?
No.
You don't want to make an error, and that's why sometimes these case studies and the data and everything else gives you the confidence to jump. At least you can come back and say, well, this is what it said. This is hence the trials. We tested this. It should work, but you've got to remember that in 2-3 years' time, technology might have moved on, and it might look like it was maybe a wrong decision, but you've learned so much during that period. Because if you wait for the Holy Grail point, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
The investment's going to be too high,
Completely. So I suppose there's another side of it as well, which is we're talking about real world efficiencies. Obviously, if the vehicle doesn't have as much range as you might, that means you're going to be charging maybe more frequently. So where are maybe some of the pitfalls, maybe some of the challenges? I know that we've done a lot of analysis.
Yeah.
There's 2 vehicles, they'll remain nameless at the moment for this, but they've got very different charging speed. And as a result, that's a huge impact. So do you want to walk us through some of that?
I think, if you're out making choices or looking at what works for you, I think clearly vans have been a bit behind cars in terms of the charging speeds. That's been quite well advertised, and actually we're still behind, but there are improvements being made. There's new tech coming through, new entrants are getting that DC charging a bit higher. But it's very much more so related to those that have got a sort of public charge, and that's so important when the wheels aren't turning, you're not earning scenario, as you said. But I think from a point of view of not necessarily just looking at how fast it can charge, it's the charge curve element of it. It's, technology has improved, and therefore what you're probably looking for is how long, for what period of time can it max that charge for, so it doesn't tail off at 50-60%. So ideally you're looking at between 10 and 80%. How quickly does it charge between those periods? And it might not be that you're looking to do 10 to 80, you might be looking just to put another 10% in, but the ability to do that in such a short space of time versus having to wait longer costs money. That's the operational downtime. And as you mentioned a moment ago, Russ, we've done some analysis between a couple of vehicles, and it's not small change, is it? It really isn't small change. And this is not on huge fleets like Charlotte's got. These are on smaller fleets. And
like 1 to 1, there's a £5,000 difference
over
massive. 3 years, right?
You get into hundreds of thousands, if not millions in some cases, if you are going to need to kind of charge urgently or build that into part of your operation. So, it's charge speeds, absolutely. Charge curve, and maybe the OEMs could be a little bit more open about some of that. It's not easy to find.
And I think maybe just jumping in, Russ, from our point of view, there's a couple of sides to this. There's no way we can, as a sort of end user, customer, get to that point, right? We rely on, I guess, the work you're doing and your ability to kind of gather and analyze and help us guide into those decisions. But imagine trying to translate that nuance to the person behind the wheel as well. Yeah. How do we distill those messages to ensure that they know, well, I'm driving, I'm going to say, the Kia product today, and therefore that's what I need to do in terms of charge approach. Yeah. But actually, because it's a pooled fleet and the way we use them is different, and I've had to buy a couple of different things, tomorrow my job is slightly different, and I'm driving the Ford product, and that's got a nuanced approach to how it charges, and therefore this is what we need to do. Yeah. It's a level of management that is so removed from
just turning the key and
driving off and thinking there's a fuel station.
Yeah, exactly. I know where that is. I know where a local one. I know what to look out for. Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
And I think again on that charging side, that when it comes to the charge curve, I think it's very easy to get lost in max charge speed. And there's a lot of manufacturers will say, so if you're looking at the specs, you'll say, oh, this can do 125 kilowatts. You're like, oh, okay, great. But then you look at it, it's like, for a little peak of about 2% of that actual battery.
And then it just goes like this.
And then everything else is dropped off. So I think, Matt, what you were saying is that 10 to 80% time is a way more important metric.
Yeah.
But then you also have the slight challenge that we have, and again, coming back to drivers, is based on Nirvana, right? That's a case of finding the right charger as well that can marry up with that vehicle. The amount of times that you go to what you think is an ultra rapid charger and you think, great, I'll max out this bit, and then you're like, why am I pulling 62 kilowatts, right? It's like, it's completely mismatched. And then how do you communicate that with drivers? Because they're like, well, I was told it should charge roughly between this time and that time, and it isn't, so it is,
and then if you're kind of pulling back from that and saying, well, that's creating a level of complexity with the public network and the unique characteristics of the specific model you've chosen for that instance, you go, okay, we'll pull back from that. Then you're still driving that onto the driver's driveway potentially, or into their home environment to get that kind of maximized home charging.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? When there's certain models, and you look at certain fleets as well, where they're in a position to make it work a lot easier. And I think we should be honest about that, right? There's certain fleets that have managed to transition at scale, have been either returned to depot, or have got a lot of people that are returning to base because they can keep that cost down.
Or it's a single load. It's a single consistent load.
Same route, pretty much the same. Rinse and repeat. So with the home charger, does it matter as much if you've not got that fast charging speed? If your use case is always going to be charge at home, you could probably argue it doesn't really. But if you then try and move that vehicle around in operations, you give it to somebody that can't charge at home, that charge speed is going to be a bigger factor, isn't it?
And I think it's where we're kind of trying not to overwhelm ourselves is to say we know within our employee population, within our driving community, we will have people that not being able to charge at home is going to be the case. So there will have to be solutions. But again, can we pull that back and go, don't try and solve that problem today? I think that's what we've tried to do. I think we've tried to solve all of these problems and actually then gone, no, hang on a minute, pull back from that. That is a population we'll have to address. And that will bring with it some of those challenges with, is that the product or is that the product? But actually, can we just give ourselves, a moment to go, this is a population we know we can home charge with. We know we can maximize that strategy. Let's spend our time there and not try and kind of eat the elephant.
And some of it is actually just getting the infrastructure. Some of it might not necessarily be an actual vehicle challenge. It should be, maybe it's about, well, actually we just need on-street chargers at outside somebody's home. That's going to be the challenge that we need to address in the future. The vehicle will still be completely accurate. But so it's always that little bit of which is way more than you ever had with any kind of diesel van, is you have to think about the refueling element sometimes, and not always it's purely about that actual vehicle side as well, right?
No, I think, and as you said a moment ago, waiting for that kind of that perfect state probably won't happen. But I think even, as you said, if you kind of dipping your toe in and actually go with something that doesn't quite feel right at the moment, but maybe the benefits you're getting in the lower hanging fruit is kind of offsetting maybe some of those challenging moments. You've dipped in, you've had a go, it's a bit challenging, might be a bit of public charging and a home, it doesn't quite work. It doesn't mean to say not to do it, just maybe do it on a small scale to learn. So the danger is that stagnation, doing nothing, and the cost of doing nothing could be quite severe later on. But going back to the kind of driver it seems the driver is so key. They need to be brought on that journey. They need to be, as educated as much as possible. Gave an example, like you jump from one vehicle to another. What messaging inside the vehicle is telling them, giving them good advice, whether that is on phones and advice, and this is what you do, this is where you charge for this particular vehicle, is better here or there or whatever it might be. Got to look at that whole communication piece from start to finish to get success. So.
Without a doubt. So we'll move on to, battery size. So it's as we've gone through the different generations, different OEMs have tried different things. Some have come out with a replaceable battery, come out with different battery sizes to try and offset some of the payload losses that have been synonymous with some of the bigger batteries. With the change in technology and as we start seeing better batteries, just full stop, that have got the right range, does that become less of an issue, or do you think that's still going to be a factor that a lot of fleets will still want to consider?
I think it will. I think what the manufacturers have done, I mean, there are quite a number of them are offering different battery sizes. Obviously, as we know, sort of larger battery, kind of bigger range but less payload and vice versa. And I think it was there to make sure that we've got something for everybody. Hopefully that'll max it out. And kind of one of the reasons why obviously the derogation to 4.25 tonne came in, just to try and give you those that needed a little bit more range or need a bit more payload can get there. But I think you make a really good point. Battery tech is moving on, and we're going to be starting seeing probably lighter, heavier density energy within those batteries. Is there really going to be a need to have much bigger batteries? Is it actually the payload's going to be a much better scenario? I think, I kind of thinking to myself, you can kind of, charging infrastructure will get better. You'll be able to charge more regularly. So the range thing becomes hopefully slightly less of a concern. But you don't just magically improve your payload. So is it better to just go maximise yourself on a payload, deal with the range, because infrastructure will get better, charging it better, be easier to operate. Also, like we said earlier, about moving that vehicle to another area or another operation. If you have maxed your payload out, then that's great. That it gives you much more options. You can't just magic that out of the sky. But at least the charging network would have approved. So I think they've done it to catch all at the moment. I suspect that might be shrunk down again.
Because if you think about old vehicles, like when you were buying a diesel, you pretty much, it wasn't massive variance between payloads previously, between different derivatives, weren't it? But suddenly you've got this quite a significant difference between payloads that you've got in EVs. And if we just get a battery that is good, lightweight, gives the right range, do you need to really offer that? And you could go a little bit more back to the old school method.
I mean, when we looked at our kind of DCA data and we did the analysis of the telematics and we kind of looked at what proportion of our fleet was doing, let's say, sub 200, it was a big number, wasn't it? And I think that's where you kind of go, this is a really good point, because if we can really embed operations understanding of how that's being used, not how they think it's being used, which is two very, very different things sometimes. And then, we look to the manufacturers to say, make this as light as possible. But actually, if you topped out at 350, 400, it's probably going to do its job for, good proportions of our kind of day-to-day activity. That becomes really interesting. But it's hard to see really what the manufacturers are seeking to, which solution they're trying to find a problem to, and therefore where they're going to go. And that's really hard then to digest as a fleet.
And it might be one of those, but it might be one of those that just is effectively, it's just a Gen 1, Gen 2 issue, right? This potentially becomes irrelevant as the technology just gets a little bit better. And I keep using it, but at the moment I think we're still in that position where we're looking at especially commercial vehicles and going, well, I've got to make a choice. I've got to be incentivized in some way. There's got to be an ESG agenda. But I think as technology improves, somebody only recently said, well, I don't have to make a choice. I don't have to be incentivized to go get my iPhone 17 or whatever else. I want it. It makes sense. And I think as technology, as what we can see coming through, that incentive to just go for the electric option because it just makes sense, right? And I think that's when it is a bit of a game changer. We're not quite there yet, but we definitely feels like we're getting closer, right?
And I think, I think actually slimming down the options that are available makes it much clearer decision making for a fleet manager. Having all these battery sizes, different ratings, it's like, where do I go? But I understand why the OEMs have done it. They just want to give you as much option as possible to find it to work in your operation. That makes absolute sense at this point. But I suspect it might not later on when you reach that you said that sort of 300 odd mile, whatever it might, you think, well, that's going to work anywhere. Now I'm really interested in, the payload side. This is what I'm going to max out. And now it all makes sense.
And to some degree, how have you built that? Where have you put the batteries? What are the rear dimensions? How does that work for my load? So it's then playing into a different space around analysing those different products and saying, okay, this will do the job that I need it to do. At the moment, it feels an overwhelming number of choices and variables with challenges on what that delivers for you.
And it's weird, isn't it? Because I've seen some OEMs that have said, right, well, we've got battery swap, so it doesn't actually matter. You can, as you go through the life, we can add more batteries, and eventually more cells as you go along, and it will reduce your payload, but it'll give you better range, so you've got a bit of that flexibility. But I still feel first of all, feels quite expensive. You're not really able to control. Makes it quite difficult from a residual value point of view. Well, what was it originally set at, right? So again, hopefully that as we move forward and get better technology, we don't have to think in quite the same way. So it's kind of linked with payload. We'll talk a bit about towing. Have you had, what experience have we had? Charlotte, when you're looking at your fleet, have you considered towing in there at all? Or
to be honest, because of the nature of the work being done by we don't have a huge amount of towing across our business. It's kind of very much isolated into our operational infrastructure business. You know, they're on sites and they're going to more remote locations. We've parked it.
Yeah.
Because actually, when we looked at the data and we looked at the analysis, you know, they're not going to be our early adopters. So there's a kind of step back from that from our perspective, and hopefully then we'll see that evolution in the technology when we get to those particular areas of our fleet.
Because it's frustrating, isn't it? The vehicles can tow like a train, right? It can tow really, really well. But then the OEMs are just not opening up the actual, the full towing capacity, are they? So it does makes it difficult for fleets when you're looking at it at the moment. It's getting better, but it's hard.
And you've got that tow versus load, right? What are you carrying and what are you towing, and trying to marry those combinations. So
it's a real balance, because it's a really interesting point. You know, it's one of the reasons why we can't take electric because it doesn't tow. And let's be honest, first generation vehicles, not many of them did tow. And if they did, it was probably 750 kg or whatever. Things have moved on. They absolutely have moved on. You know, you're well over a ton, up to 2 ton situations now. But the impact of towing, you said a moment ago, aren't they great? They're great at towing. Yeah, they are. The torque levels are, but the range impact could be huge. Probably more significant than anything else you might be doing as well, even from winter side of things. I think we discussed a little bit before, like is I'm not sure that's quite the problem that they need to solve right now. It may be a case of convincing the vast majority in terms of, charging speeds are great, ranges are stronger, payloads are in a good place, and then kind of tackle the towing, because that's kind of the end game, because that's where big utilities firms are going to need to tow off the back of their tippers and whatever it might be. But right at this moment, it's probably not the first thing that our customers are asking for. But I get the fact that things have moved on in second generation. So as long as that trajectory keeps going, it's kind of that argument might be a little bit less of an issue later on.
Well, I'll just also add the point, where are you parking that van and trailer combination at a charge point in order to charge it?
There's no way to fit in anyway.
You know, the practical implication of
You're
that.
effectively going to have to go to HGV like facilities really to charge something like that. And we're seeing a little bit more of that, aren't we? There's a few companies that are coming out that have just got commercial vehicle focused charging, but again, their hubs, they're not all dotted all over the place, to meet those requirements. And I think again, is it something that will get fixed? Does the towing challenge become less of an issue when you've got the right battery tech? Because, as you said, towing affects range. Doesn't matter if you've got a massive range. If you've got that available, that efficiency, or you've got that capability, or the charge speed again. And maybe I think your point about it's not really a problem. There's a few challenges that they're trying to solve. Maybe the towing it feels like it anyway. It's almost the last thing that they're going to properly tick off.
The really difficult challenges or operations, that will be great for them, but there's quite a lot of other fruit to go for, if you know what I mean, at this moment in time.
And I think we gain the benefit of, as I say, that diverse fleet in this case plays to this, because there was a lot of other operational areas to go at and a lot of other activity to target first. My sympathies would go out to a business where that's their core, and they're then trying to kind of consider this transition. You've got the risk this would double your fleet size, because you actually need 2 vehicles to carry your load and things like that. So it's a really interesting point, but one that at the moment I think people are waiting on. I think people are pulling back from having to make those decisions. We certainly are.
And it's a shame, isn't it? Because this isn't about cars, but again, it's a lot easier for cars, fundamentally, to start transitioning to electric. Things like having the right charging network out there, even a small thing, but sometimes commercial vehicles pulling up at charging sites cannot be sometimes it doesn't get well received, does it? And if you've got that from a brand point of view. So I do think there are definitely some challenges still there, but it's getting better. It is getting better. In terms of the product that Matt, I know I'm not as connected to it as I was, but you've seen a lot of the new product that's coming out. Is there anything that properly excites you in terms of some of the EV?
Well, definitely, certainly mentioned one a bit earlier in terms of the PV5. I think that's bit of a game changer, price-wise, price point, range, capabilities, everything that it kind of does, the network, and the history of that company in terms of their electrification, their capabilities, battery tech, all that is fantastic. Warranty as well. It's been really fantastic. But I have to say, look, the second generation vans that have come through, whether you're looking at small, medium, and now even large, you look at some of the, Renault Master, new Mercedes Sprinter, even because that was always a bit of a holdback. It was like, can't do large vans. That isn't working. They're kind of the late to the party, and that's really moved on somewhat. Verizon being recently coming through and some of what that capabilities it can do, onboard weighing and things like that. Really, really positive additions. I think we should be welcoming these new. I'm really keen. I've probably said it before in other arenas where we're looking for that Tesla of vans, the one that comes through that really cracks it, makes it work, and puts the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit and moves everybody forward. I think these new entrants are making sure that the traditional OEMs are following and challenging and doing better, etc., etc. So it's an exciting time. There are definitely loads more models than there were 2-3 years ago. There's a lot more choice, but with choice, as you said, comes almost too much to look at. Tell me the answer, and that's where I guess where we come in, try and find the right models based on.
And on that then, Charlotte, in terms of what feedback would you give to OEMs if you had the opportunity to say, think about this, because I'll tee you up a little bit. One of my bugbears is around charge speed, and it's when you speak to some of the OEMs, they're saying, well, it's we're doing it because of price, we want to keep it at a price point, but then they're not necessarily calculating what the downtime is. If they just put a faster charge speed on that vehicle, it would have made it way better operationally. Yeah. Is there anything? I've probably stolen one from you there. Sorry, Charlotte.
Maybe, but I think maybe try and move away from this kind of simplistic perspective of a van, it's empty, and there's a driver behind the wheel, and talking about laden weights, unladen weights, and just move into the space of how these are being used, who's using them, and help us have a better understanding of what that truly means. Most are operated with 2 in the cab. Most will have a base conversion. Consider that and do your real world testing, and just make that more practical.
Yeah,
totally agree. And I think what OEMs could do is almost build a matrix that says, okay, based on these temperatures during the year and 25% payload, 50, 75, 100, as you said, additional person in the cab, whatever it might be, some real world examples, genuine real world usage. And then you can kind of make some really great comparisons between what's out there and make it visible. I think that's the problem. Sometimes finding this information is not that easy. No. And it's not there, is it? No. And I think at this moment in time, with a challenge to meet ZEV targets and things, well, help us, help everybody, help fleet managers, help us, etc., to make sure that we can give decent advice and save you having to do 6 months worth of trials to figure out yourself. Now, I'm not saying that it's still absolutely worthwhile doing, but would help if it was really
just
clear
that little bit of extra visibility, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, as you say, it's wading through so much data. It's either trying to gather that yourself or, work with partners to achieve that. Ultimately, they are all building a slightly different product to do a slightly different thing. So,
show us how that works.
Why can't there be more cross collaboration?
Yeah.
And, you want us to buy them. You want us to, come to our partners and lease them. Make that easy for us. Yeah,
make it an easier option, an easier choice. I think there's a number of conversations that we've had recently that where, again, you just start looking at this and it's like it is sometimes a bit convoluted. And even as fleet experts, and we're not talking about the retail market, but as fleet experts, you're looking at it going, I'm not totally sure which way I'm going to go with this one. And if that's the way that we feel as fleet experts, imagine what it's like for the retail side as well. We need to start making it, simplifying the message a little bit, right? Or just being as open as we can, providing it, and not trying to sugarcoat either, and just saying, look, it's not right for that situation, and that's okay, and just being a little bit more straight. But no, great. So in terms of, we'll go a little bit onto TCO. So TCO, obviously, we have a slightly different approach. We have what we think is a slightly better version of TCO, TCO Plus. But Matt, would you mind walking us through some of where we've kind of taken TCO and TCO Plus
I think
for commercials?
TCO has always been important. If you get an example, you go back 10 years ago and you were comparing almost that, ICE versus ICE or a similar model, etc. And it was always very important, but you would tend to looking at certain parameters and weren't necessarily going wide and needed to consider charging times and everything else. But you tend to find that the margin difference, remember doing it wasn't always massive between the two, and you probably found you had a bit more brand loyalty and you did look at reliability a bit, but realistically we said about the cookie cutter approach, sort of rinse and repeat. I'll have probably what I had last time, but maybe a slightly better engine. And that kind of work. Now TCO Plus or TCO is far, far more important. It is so critical. And one of the main reasons being we mentioned a moment ago is when you're comparing two vehicles together at least, the differences can be so much more. And as you said, hundreds of thousands in some cases, maybe even millions as well. And therefore, where TCO Plus comes in, I think it's taking it down, drilling down to that next level. You know, it's looking at the reliability, it's looking at the charging speeds, the max charging speeds or the max it can take. It looks at operational downtime. It's looking at the reliability of the vehicles as well, how often, and service schedules. They have different service schedules. I mean, they all do, most vehicles do, but certainly within the electric arena, and how often do they need to be off the road? You add those up, and especially if you're a high labour rate sort of company, offering specialist services, any time where they are grounded, your operational downtime is so much more expensive. So it is absolutely critical, more critical than it's ever been, I think, at this particular point. And especially when you're looking at different, we said it earlier about we're not quite sure how long life cycles are and how long you want to keep them. Yeah. It makes a big old difference depending on what period of time you're taking it over. It's been almost revolutionary, I would say, in terms of discussions that we can have with clients, showing them the difference, and obviously it is quite eye-opening, and it has influenced decision making, and you combine that with the data that comes along in the back of it as well. It's been fantastic. It's really, really helped. So we use it a lot. Good.
It's good to hear, because I think it's probably the way to start properly analysing vehicles. And again, when you've got so much information and minute nuances between different models, but they suddenly collectively add up to some significant cost. But Charlotte, we've obviously run through that kind of methodology with you. Did it help? How did it help in terms of conversations internally? Because procurement can sometimes look at a vehicle and go, that one's cheap, go with that one, right?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the case.
It's not necessarily the case. And it is that it's being able to very easily and clearly quantify those differences and communicate them, because some of the discussions we've certainly had within our business is this might be the decision we're taking, and we think we might be making it for this reason, and we're going to accept where that might cause us issues down the road. So ultimately, if we have to make a choice, we know maybe the pitfalls that surround that, but we're going to do it anyway. But we've got transparency on that. We don't have to kind of go in blind and go, well, we think we're going with lowest cost and that everything will be fine. So when I think we're going cost as a driver, and actually what this might mean is X, Y, and Z in terms of consequences, but we're informed about that and we've got transparency. Conversely, it's helped us say maybe not the right size, come down a size, go up a size, look at that. So it's coming at it from different sides. Yeah,
this makes sure, I think, it's
just information,
not being blindsided at all.
Absolutely.
And at least you know that you know exactly what you're walking into.
Yes. It's hugely valuable.
It's also influenced people choosing, as you said a moment, upsizing, downsizing vehicles that they may not have considered. It's also taken you through having a good critical look at your operation in general and seeing, what are we carrying these vehicles? Do we need to carry everything all the time? And you can build that into and especially when you're looking at TCO, said, look, there is another vehicle, but if you could fit into it and you could make this work, it could be dramatic change to your costs. So kind of maybe decisions or discussions that may not have been truly the same 10 years ago, but they're absolutely very valid now. So.
Guys, thank you so much. We'll start coming to an end. So I suppose my main question, two separate questions, but Matt, I'll come to you first. What's the one misconception about EV choice that you'd love fleets to stop believing?
Oh, a bit of a misconception. I think that they can't work. They don't work. I take the first hurdle, the first brick wall, I stop. Yeah. Okay, so if I can't do that, then I'm not going to go any further. And I'll go, actually, I'd mentioned a moment ago, have you looked at the operation? Are there potential changes you could make, minor changes that might have been there all along, and actually it isn't a big change? but it allows you to free up and get over that hurdle. I think the danger is we can all be accused of maybe not liking change at times, and that's understandable. But I think even if you do come up against that brick wall and you say no for now, you've got to remember to come back again. Things are moving at such a pace, technology, infrastructure, everything. What is a brick wall or a hurdle today is not tomorrow. Yeah. So I think not to get disillusioned and say, we'll park it again for another year. Yeah. It's like you can only park it really for a few months and then it's going to change again.
It's a pace, isn't it?
And to keep trying, don't just stop and go back and do what you're always doing. I think it's just making sure that you are doing the trials, you are testing it. Even if they don't work, that's okay. You've tested it, go again. So I think, I don't know if it's a misconception or not, if that's answering that question, but I think it's, don't get stalled at the first hurdle.
I think there's a lot of people that say, well, we can't do it because of that. And then, or it's based on feedback. It could be anecdotal as well, can't it? As well, it could be like, oh, well, my drivers tell me they do 300 miles a day. And then you look at the telematics and you're like, it doesn't quite look like that. Maybe once every 3 months, maybe, but it's a difference.
Or it'll only do half the range. It knows they're terrible. Exactly. It's just
Facebook
you have to do.
Getting in the way. Again.
Yeah. And they all set fire, and this. It's I think that unfortunately that doesn't help, does it? At times, but yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And then Charlotte, if you could give operators one tip for getting EV selection right, what do you think it would be?
That's a big question.
It's a big one.
I kind of maybe echoing Matt's point, don't assume you're going to get it right.
Yeah. Okay.
Good
shout,
you will take on board vehicles that, you might need to move around your fleet, you might need to consider getting rid of after a, period of use. But, I think what we're learning is start, try, get going, and some of that might not be right, but do it. Yeah.
I suppose that comes around to kind of a flex kind of offering that we've done that with, tying it in with some of the analysis and then saying, actually, we're not totally sure. We feel like we're pretty comfortable with it, but maybe let's take down a flex contract rather than a full, and a bit of a try before you buy. And again, that's stuff that we've done in the past, isn't it, Matt?
I definitely recommend that in terms of, piece of advice or anything else is that one, we talk about, we must start, but treat it a little bit like any investment to some extent. That'd be like a pension, for example. The earlier you start and you can do it in small chunks and actually get the benefit later on, rather than if you join later on in the party, you're having to make big changes and you miss out on all that sort of growth, all that learnings in between the two. And I think that's a really sort of valuable thing. And to do that, like you said with Flex, actually taking something on over a shorter period, see how the market moves, but you're learning during that period, you're actually testing out, but you haven't committed yourself too heavily.
You're not making a little mistake times by 1,000 as an example. As an example, it's maybe over 20, or it's a lot less of an impact on a business, isn't it? So, fantastic. Well, Charlotte, Matt, thank you so much. I think it's been really, really insightful. I feel like we could probably put the world to rights for another hour or something like that. But no, it was really insightful, and hopefully listeners will get a lot to take out of that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Russ.
Cheers. I hope this has been a useful listen and that you feel better equipped for when making your next fleet decision. Thanks to all of our guests who have joined us throughout this series, and thank you for listening. We'll be back again with many more insights very, very soon. See you then.